Welcome to this episode of Monitoring the Pulse. I, as always, am your host, Arash Bakhshandehpour, and I'm excited for this episode. I'm joined by the founder of PI Sciences, Jason Wardell, out here in Utah as well. Jason, how goes it?
It is going fantastic. It's warm for February, but it's a beautiful time.
Hey, I appreciate you making time, man. I'm really excited to jump in.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm actually really excited for this podcast.
Jason, before we jump in and learn a little bit more about PI Sciences, give us a little bit about your background. Who you are.
So my background, I originally was not anticipating running a startup or going into personal injury. I honestly didn't even know personal injury was a thing. I knew people got in car wrecks, but I didn't know there was an entire industry built up around it. And that's going to sound a little naive, especially for people that I do work with in the industry that have been here for multiple decades. But I went to Brigham Young University and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I thought I wanted to be a doctor. So I took the MCAT and then did an internship at a hospital shadowing doctors. And all the doctors were like, you don't want to be a doctor. So I was like, I don't want to be a doctor. So I was like, maybe I'll be a dentist. So I took the DAT and because I worked for a dentist in high school and I was like, oh yeah, I'll be a dentist. And I spoke with dentists. They're like, you don't want to be a dentist. And I was like, I guess I don't want to be a dentist. And personally, I didn't want to be digging in people's mouths. That didn't quite grab my butt. So I really tried to figure out what I wanted to do. So I studied genetics and biotechnology with an emphasis in business and threw in some singing on the side. So I sang in the choirs at Brigham Young University and just loved my educational experience. But when I graduated, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I got a job working at a research company, a medical research company called Class Research. They're based here in Utah. They just moved to Pleasant Grove. And I was the project manager over their software. And I really fell in love with building cool tools, building things that really worked. And I transitioned from there to Avetta, and still Avetta is a supply chain risk management, not the beauty supply company or the beauty school. It's the supply chain risk management. And I worked for them for many, many years. And I learned so much about what it takes to run high quality software with migrations and data quality. What are Fortune 50 companies looking for when they are looking at data? What are they wanting to see from their procurement side? So I learned a lot through that avenue. And I ran into PI Sciences back in 2017. I met my friend and co-founder, Dr. Brandon Carter. He had been doing, it's called an impairment exam, an IME. And he had been doing these manually. And if you're unfamiliar with IMEs or impairment ratings, the exam takes a doctor 30 to 45 minutes to complete. And once they're complete, the process of record review and generating an impairment report and a full narrative can take anywhere from 10 to 18 to 24 hours of just grueling work to build these very court-ready discoverable documentation that are used in personal injury cases. And it was a stormy October back in 2017, and I was wearing shorts, and we started talking outside of our cars, and I was like, what do you do? And he explained it to me, and I was like, I work with software. I bet we could find something. Like, this is a figure outable thing. Like, let's give it a shot. So we did a lot of various tests and Word plugins that absolutely sucked. He had a prototype software. It wasn't HIPAA compliant, big red flag, by the way. It wasn't SOC 2 compliant. There was a lot of issues. We couldn't scale. We couldn't add on additional features. It wasn't good for setting up multi-state, complying with data privacy. Like, there was a lot of stuff we had to fix. And I was like, I know a couple of software guys. Let's see what we can do. And then we brought on Rodney Hickman, who's our CTO right now, and amazing developer. And we have built PI Sciences from that point. And there have been multiple times where the company had stalled, and I went back and worked full time. So I was moonlighting PI Sciences till January of last year. And I started working on it full time, like 100%. And it has been challenging. I've learned more about the value of marketing and sales in growing a pipeline. Like, if you think about the value of a business, is it in the product or is it in the customers that are coming in? So both of them show health. You can have a great product with no customers, or you can have tons of customers with a crap product. What's the difference between them? And that's something I've been having to learn this year. And it has been more stressful than my entire professional career up to this point, but I've learned more in that process. So that's where I'm at right now. running PI Sciences. I'm a dad and a husband. I've got 3 beautiful little kids. So I'm always on my toes. Weekends are pretty packed, coaching a basketball team right now. And then on top of that, I'm smoking meat and barbecue. And so, yeah, that's what I got.
Lots of meat. I remember saying that was
yeah.
the first thing that caught my eye. If you want to take a look, find Jason on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Jason,
You can
you
also
kind of
find
walk
me
me
on
through.
Insta on Smoke Cold Barbecue. That's where I post all my meat stuff because my wife was like, your personal account was of your kids and your wife and everything, and now it's just briskets and sausages and barbecue. And I'll post something here on a different account. So Smoke Cold Barbecue.
Smoke old barbecue. Smoke old barbecue.
Smoke hold, like chokehold.
Smoke hold barbecue. Got it.
Yeah, smoke
okay,
hold.
perfect. So you kind of walk through like your background, and maybe call it like the light bulb moment of an opportunity in the market for PI Sciences. Help me talk through, because something that you touched on that I'm really interested in is the compliance aspect. There are a lot of legacy industries have antiquated systems and processes simply because there's so much red tape and there's so many hoops that need to be jumped through. So people just resist change because it's easier to maintain the status quo. So help me understand like what that learning process was, and then also how that fed into the R&D and development of the product when understanding the compliance and the regulatory aspects of what PI Science is trying to solve for.
Yeah. So if we're talking about antiquated systems, so we tried to, when we first launched, we're like, hey, this would be cool. Let's connect in with all these systems. It's really hard taking like a product or a software application built in 2020 and trying to integrate it into a system running on legacy Windows 98. Like very, very challenging from a data migration, just an integration standpoint with maintaining that connection. Or there are some EHRs that only work on like old versions of Internet Explorer. It's like, who's using that? Why? Like there's much better applications, but how they've set up their contracts, how they've set up their applications, their security protocols only work with certain versions and they haven't updated it for the additional browsers. So there's a lot of integration problems that we ran into. If we're thinking about the light bulb moment when we were like, how do we overcome this? Because the problem we were trying to solve, the first problem was, how do we speed up how fast we can get these reports done? Because they're taking like 18 to 20 hours. So our first iteration, like our first MVP was like, hey, let's set the KPI and let's try to set a goal of getting each report done. Can we get it done in sub 10 hours, sub 8 hours? And that still may seem like a really long time, but when we are aggregating and mapping through hundreds, sometimes thousands of pages of medical records, aggregating diagnostic codes, and then associating causation statements with research articles supporting the mechanism of injury, the diagnostic codes, and the validity of the treatment plan. There's a lot of data aggregation that happens in those reports. And we're like, okay, let's see if we can get that in a sub 10 hour. And right now it takes us about 3 hours from beginning to end, from doctor starting with the patient to generating and signing a report and sending it off for billing. Like that's how long it takes for the doctors that are doing the impairment exams in our product. But the second problem we were running into, so an impairment exam is done at the end of a personal injury case when someone is still hurting. There's subjective complaints, there's range of motion restrictions, so they can't move as well. It's post-surgery. Like there's a lot of things that come into play with an impairment, what qualifies or quantifies for an impairment. But we were finding attorneys were sending us impairment exams for, it's called an IME, independent medical examination impairment exam. They were sending it over to us and we're like, this person doesn't qualify. They're still in pain, but they've only had one treatment type. And it's an indicator that we have to meet to justify for an impairment rating. It's called maximum medical improvement. This is like jargon zilla when you come to like personal injury because there's so much to talk about. Everything has an acronym. But really, we had to get these patients to MMI and we're like, they don't have treatment. Or they come into us, they haven't had any treatment yet. And the attorney was like, I don't even know where to take this person. I don't even know step one. What do we do? Because they're hurting. I don't even know what's going on. So we were like, we've now have to rewind this clock and figure out how do we streamline a treatment plan where they can go from start to finish. The attorney knows the direction, the patient knows the direction, the doctors know the direction, so they don't just get done with one treating provider and get discharged. And then they're sitting there going, I don't know what to do. and then you have a 6 to 8 month gap in care. Like that's a real problem that happens with personal injury cases. And that was one of the big problems we were trying to solve that kind of stemmed out of trying to solve the first problem.
It stood out. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of an evolution of problems, like this big black hole when it comes to the industry of no one really knows the direction. Once they finish with this guy, there's no second step. And there's a lot of companies that do what we're doing, but we've really felt very passionate about the people that we've been trying to help through that process. But if you're talking about like integrating with old systems, so when we're doing that treatment plan, we thought, we're going to integrate with and PT systems and EHRs and imaging and billing records. It is an absolute nightmare trying to maintain. And some EHRs don't even have open APIs where you can tie in and grab that information. So it takes a load off of the doctors. So we're still dealing with faxes and emails
Manual
and
exports.
Manual exports. And then we're scanning those and adding them onto the case, just trying to optimize our workflow and lots of records on each case. And really, there are still hurdles that we're running into where we have to use secondary options that isn't the ideal state, but it still achieves the same outcome. And I think that's, if we're thinking of software, and I have said this, I don't know how many times, I feel that in a lot of software development, or even just business development, you may have an idea that's like, this would be so cool to fix, but there's probably a less sophisticated, aka dumb way to do it that still achieves it that's 90% cheaper. And that's really where we've come into play with a lot of legacy systems trying to integrate. It's like, okay, I got to think simple. Think like someone would think 20 years ago. How would it be solved? And there's an answer there. I think there's real benefit for looking in the past to determine what are my next steps forward and how can we do it simple to define an MVP and then use accessible software and development and AI as you're integrating that. How does that accelerate those workflows? So
a lot
off
to
my
unpack.
soapbox.
No, a lot. It's interesting because something thematic that I have observed in a lot of these conversations that I'm having, whether it's as part of these video series or just as part of my agency, is the founding story is always, this is the initial idea. Then you dig a little bit. And then one idea you identify has kind of scattered into a series of other problems that need solutions. You dig a little bit further, then you understand maybe connective issues between these problems. And then you try to find a new solution. Then you understand what the systems and processes have historically, and it's from there, just like it's a rabbit hole, right? It kind of keeps going. And so one thing there are a few things that I want to follow up on from what you just mentioned with the first one is, so historically, there are these antiquated legacy processes, systems, and it's fragmented, right? And that's like probably putting it lightly. That's one. But then you mentioned that there are alternative services that fall in a similar vein to where PI Sciences lands. So how did you guys look at differentiation when you were building PI Sciences?
Yeah. So the first biggest differentiator that we looked at is the provider networks that do like we call it quarterbacking, like medical quarterback or medical management. We call it fractional chief medical officer. So the first big differentiator we have is, first off, it's not that we want to assume the medical bills, like, because there are funding groups. And what I say by medical funding groups, they have chiros, PTs, imaging providers, pain management, neurosurgeons. And what they do is they send the patient to their guys, and their guys do the work. And then this funding group buys the medical debt from that group for a percentage rate. So let's say it's 40 cents on the dollar. So they have $10,000 lien. They buy it for $4,000, and that funding group, or that medical funding group, owns that other $6,000. So when the case settles, they get paid on that $10,000. That's the hope. There are reductions. There's a lot of things that come into play with that, but that is where the revenue is generated for those providers. So it gives immediate cash flow to the providers, and they sit on the lien. We took a very different approach because if we think about our mission with every single case is think of the end in mind. And it's rare. It's not common for providers to think, I am going to treat this patient and document it like it's going to court. This thing is going to end up in litigation, and my rear end is going to be on the stand defending this patient. Not a lot of doctors think like that. They don't even want to go to court. So how do we differentiate ourselves is, first off, we set up every single case as if it's going to court. So an attorney, when that patient gets done, it's ran through an independent network. We don't even get involved in how do they get billed or paid. That's for them to figure out. That's on those providers. They can have a funding group buy their lien. It doesn't bother us. We really don't care. What we care about is that the documentation is accurate, the diagnosis is accurate, and that the treatment plan really does correlate with causation. Those things right there is really what drives cases forward. So you can accelerate through that pathway. So item number one that differentiates us, we're an independent network of providers. The second big thing that differentiates us is when we sign a law firm. First off, we get all of their providers added into the system. So when we do a triage and we structure their treatment plan, the doctor that does that doesn't have to know who they like doing work with. But we can say, you know what? We now know because they've been added to the system, and we can drive through their treatment plan like, okay, you need chiro. Here's a guy near you that this law firm likes working with, that they already have a business relationship with. So we can then send to their preferred provider list because we don't know who do you like working with in Orlando, Florida? No idea. But that firm already knows who they like working with. So we can add them to the network and drive those referrals through there. The third thing that really differentiates us when the patient reaches that final exam, that IME, there are lots of providers that do IMEs, but the delay in time frame is one of the biggest things that becomes a challenge. So can you get an expedited report? Typically, no. Expedited means about a week. So, or more. A lot of litigation attorneys that we work with, they say that the turnaround time for their reporting is anywhere between 15 to 20 business days. And sometimes it delays even longer than that. So it's hard for them if they have a tight
Brutal.
timeline on a case. How can they get those reports back? So, because our initial focus when we started this business was first ethics in mind, and then second, how fast can we get these reports done? We get them done in about 3 hours. And now we have volume that we also have to deal with. So there's supply constraint that we do have, or fulfillment constraint, I should say. We can get ours done in about 5 business days, about 1 week. So once we get them done, we visit with that patient, we can get those reports with all the bills, records, and everything back to the attorney in that time frame. So we can give compressed timelines that really work with short time windows, especially when you're dealing with courts. Because it's like you got 30 days to get something turned around. Who can you work with to actually meet that deadline in that window? So that's one of the other differentiators that we have.
Got it. Okay. That's interesting because it sounds like even like the systems or services that have introduced themselves to the market, like alternatives to PI sciences.
Mhm.
I think the fundamental thing that you're trying to solve for sounds like those services might still be missing. I think
Yeah.
which is timing, turnaround, right? Like you mentioned, like on the IME turnaround, you're looking at 5 business days as opposed to a quoted 20.
Yeah. So
That
that's one
I
of them.
imagine that's massive.
Yeah. Well,
Is
one
killer.
of one of the bigger differentiators is having an accurate diagnosis and treatment plan. Because
Okay.
if you think of like EHRs and what they're designed for, they're really good at capturing treatment notes for that provider. If you're a physical therapist, they're
Hmm.
looking at physical therapy treatment plan. They're not thinking, oh, what do I need to do to coordinate this thing once I get done? So sending out for MRI, sending out for X-ray, sending to chiro, sending to pain management, sending to neurology. Like their systems aren't designed for that. It's for supporting that provider with their patient. Once they're discharged, what's the next step? So that's the biggest thing that we really try solving is getting an accurate diagnosis and then managing that treatment plan. They can treat with that doctor who uses their own EHR to document their treatment notes, but once they're done, they don't have to take the extra time to figure out where are you going next? Who are you going to go see? Like what is the next step that you need to take to figure out why you're still hurting?
That alleviates so much stress. Like that's
Yeah.
that's such a valuable value prop. So okay, so we're gonna I want to keep expanding here because we've gone through like your career path. We've gone through the ideation phase, the iteration phase that
Yeah.
followed, we'll call 2025 like the execution phase. That right, and like now we are
Yeah.
now we're here in 2026. Um,
Yeah.
before let's say when we got to that 2025 window. How did you look at go to market, and what was the general strategy behind go to market?
Yeah. So there was a couple of things that we had to look at in terms of go to market. The first being who is the customer that we are trying to solve this problem for? Because there are so many people involved in these problems that there's a lot of times we would be trying to figure out, like, oh, is it the attorney that we should be focusing on? Is it the doctors? Is it the medical networks that need to be involved? So it's a very complex problem of the chicken and the egg. Do we start with the firms? Do we start with the network? If we have a network and we don't have cases coming through that we're triaging and managing, there's no benefit for the network to be paying.
Then why?
So exactly, where do we start? So really, we had to bite the bullet a little bit and say, you know what, we're going to front load our staff. We're going to front load our business to where we have more incoming traffic than we can actually manage. And then we can say, we need this network, and we can pull on the talent and the staff that we need to help us execute on it. So first go to market was, we need to target our customers that we're going to be working with on a very, very close basis. And that's the law firms, the personal injury firms, and supporting not just the attorneys, but the paralegals and case managers. If I think of the transactions that we do, the communication, it's rarely with the attorney. It's like 80% with the case managers and paralegals, and is
I
taking
bet.
hours and hours and hours per case off of their workload per month in
Yep.
active treatment phase patients. So our go-to-market, our first thing was, let's make sure we can build our solid program for intake, implementation, and scale for these law firms that we're going to support. The second that we have started focusing on, that's kind of like the end of 2025, 2026, is how do we expand multi-state and how can we get national? Because every market has constraints in terms of volume. So supply and demand. And if you've capped out like your current constraint, because not every firm needs the services that we have. I understand that. And not every customer is going to be like, whoo, we're going to buy today. It's like, that was actually kind of hurtful for me. It's like, no, but we can help you so much. You need us. But I've had to realize that, no, they don't. They can do their own thing. And that's
Yep.
totally fine. But really, how do we go to a multi-state? So we are looking at medical networks that have doctors that are undertrained and underskilled when it comes to running a case like it's going to court. So how do they think like an expert? How do they think like, I'm going to run this case as if it's going to trial? So we're partnering with large medical organizations who have those networks that we don't have to really source individual doctors, because that becomes very challenging. And then we're focusing on large hotspots in PI regions where we can train and educate these doctors and then provide a very secure system where they can see the transactions. And it becomes very beneficial for the firm running it and the doctor who's coordinating it. And it takes work off of both of them. Like if we can really make that work. So that's really where we've started and how we're transitioning from a single state in PI to multi-state.
My follow-up question, which you got to in that last little tidbit there, is basically how do you manage the scale? And I think the strategy with what you mentioned about going with like the network providers, the said doctors, as opposed to independently managing those relationships, it adds up to be able to support this.
The other thing that I think is beneficial, and this is something I'm looking at 2020 hindsight, in terms of managing scale,
Sure.
Alex Hormozi says, do the things that don't scale and then try to figure out how to scale them. So we did that. We did a lot of things that were not scalable at all. And I think there's a lot of learning that comes from going through the hard process of doing unscalable things, because you're going to find consistency and pattern that you can make software that now automates
Totally.
it or
Totally.
streamlines it. And you look at that with AI workflows. I imagine you see that very, very often
yeah.
with businesses. I've seen where businesses implement workflows like, this is going to fix everything. And then it's the wrong problem they're trying to fix and solve with AI, and it runs them down the wrong course. So doing something that doesn't scale in step one is actually a great great place to start, because now you can figure out what's good and what is total garbage. What don't you need to focus on? Because that's the noise in finding a solution in a go-to-market problem and product.
Yeah.
What's the noise that's going to get in your way? Because it's always distracting. You could always focus on shiny things, but if you're not actually focusing on what's my root problem, what is the step that I need to take to really fix this, and what can we use technology to accelerate? Anyways,
That's astute, because so many of the conversations I have, it's on either side of the spectrum of businesses that have either, call it, automated too early. So basically over-prepared for scale. And then you have sunk cost, you have tech debt
Yeah.
in tooling that was not necessary for the headcount
Yeah.
that was there already, or systems that are beyond your graduation level for the team to like formally adopt.
Yeah.
That hurts a business, and that becomes a pretty significant impediment to progress. Then you have the other side, which I tend to agree with you, especially as the businesses that I'm speaking to, they're in these early first couple of years stages of operating lean intentionally, identifying, again, the problem they're trying to solve for, and then doing the not scalable work for basically as long as they can.
Stupid stuff that doesn't
No
work.
question. Because automation is such a loud word in every world right now, Jason. Like everyone hears automation and they think, how do I do that in every aspect of work? So I can't blame people.
I want to work 3 hours a week. It's like, how about do something that you have to work 80 hours a week for first, and then figure out how do you cut out the noise? Like,
no question. That's how it works. So it's always, I'm smirking as you're speaking because I see both sides of the spectrum, and one side generally has a more positive trajectory with maybe speed bumps along the way. Every business does, but manageable speed bumps along the way. So the other piece that I wanted to hit on that you alluded to briefly is, and I wouldn't be doing this, I wouldn't be doing myself any service if I ignored this as well, is AI. So there are systems, there are tools, there are processes that, going back to what we just talked about, you can either automate, streamline, simplify, or build faster and better than historically would have been able to. Help me understand the general PI Sciences ethos behind AI, or yours, and how it's being used, whether it's in the product or in processes or systems.
Yeah. So I'll first start with our technology, because that's what AI is, technology. But we do use it in operations in terms of client success, in terms of data aggregation, in terms of report analysis and getting findings back to paralegals and case managers at risk cases. We're aggregating against a bunch of data that we do have on the case. Let's say there's delays. Let's say there's lack of communication from a patient. We're pulling that information, or bills are getting high. So we're using AI in a lot of different aspects. The first thing, though, that I think has helped us. So we're a bootstrap company. We've never taken funding. We are funded from the ground up, and there's pros and cons, big pros and big cons running a business that way, especially a software business. But using AI, I know that the CTO, Rodney Hickman, we have had many, many, many conversations late at night as we're working on various products regarding our report automation and our report writing and our data aggregation and finding research articles to support diagnostic findings. We have implemented AI tools that support those doctors in making the decision. So I think there's two sides to AI that we have looked at. First is, does it completely take the workload off of a human individual? So we have to look at that in a couple ways. There's computing that it can take off. So if you're looking through multiple pages of medical records, can an AI go through, grab all the diagnostic codes, grab all the medical findings, and summarize it for us? That is very, very helpful when you're looking through thousands of pages of medical records. Like, you can go through some severe like documentation analysis fatigue going through something like that. So that's kind of the first question. The second thing is, does AI make the final decision? Now, we're dealing with court-ready documentation. So if it goes to court and they question that doctor, are you aware of this? What does that doctor say? Well, the AI system gave it. So now who's at risk in that type of a case, especially if it's a lawsuit? Well, that would come on who implemented the AI in the report that went into court and now is discoverable evidence. So we have to be very careful on how we implement it and what is discoverable, what's not discoverable, and leaving the ultimate decision up to that licensed individual. So the doctor who has a license with the medical malpractice insurance, it falls under their license. So they're the ones doing that examination. But the AI accelerates. Can we take out 90% of the effort that they're going through to build these reports so we can get high quality reporting? Can we maintain this like 9 out of 9 or 10 out of 10? I don't know why I use 9. 10 out of 10 stars on our report quality with like a 1 out of 10 in terms of effort. Can we do that? Like, that's the question we have to solve. And there's ways AI that we've implemented can address that. And when we first started, there are some amazing AI companies in the med legal space. Like they have hundreds of millions of dollars of funding, like Series B funding at like billions of in valuation. Like they're just absolute megaliths when it comes to actual size. And there's so much money around it. But the one thing that we're running into as we're operating on a lean side, on a bootstrap side, how do we implement this to where it actually makes sense? And when we came to court ready documentation, there was stuff that we were trying to automate um, with AI, but AI is great for pattern recognition, for optimizing. And what it was doing is making stuff up to fill in the gaps. And there's a lot of stuff when we would get it where the gaps are there for a reason, and the doctor has to make that diagnostic leap. So if you have pain here, but no one has diagnosed why, we have to fill that gap. Can AI do that? No, that should not fall under the license or the responsibility of AI. So we have to have a doctor do that. But AI was filling that gap and it was causing serious
Yikes.
problems for us. So we had to
Yeah.
rip out a bunch of the AI systems that we were using. It's like, okay, how do we go back to square one? And that's the analogy I brought up. Like, if I'm looking 20 years ago, what's the stuff that didn't scale? What can we build that is hard coded, ugly, not sexy, that gets the job done? Like, that was the approach we took. And as we've done that, it has narrowed the scope for where AI has the biggest return for us, like in terms of revenue, in terms of cost, in terms of optimizing workflows and operations. Like that is where we have looked at implementing AI in our workflows. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's really how we have, and we use AI for a bunch of stuff, content creation, podcast editing. Like I use AI every single day with so many different models like ChatGPT, Claude, like I'm using all of them because I feel they do things better than other ones in terms of generating the output that we're looking for. But 2026, we've got some pretty amazing things on the product roadmap that we are looking to implement in terms of AI integration, as we've done the unscalable, unsexy stuff for the past 5 years. It's like, okay, I think we have a pretty dang good idea how we can implement this at scale. And that's where we're looking to utilize AI in optimizing these decisions.
What's the accelerant? Yeah, no
Yeah.
question. Yeah, I think you and I briefly talked about it when we were talking offline, where it felt like there was almost a over dependence out the gates of
Yeah.
what general AI could do. And like
Yeah.
what you just called out is a perfect example of maybe its strengths, but also its weaknesses or gaps. And I think as a result of general AI and the adoption, the aggressive adoption of it, came
Yeah.
specialized AI platforms. And with those, again, incredible strengths. But there are still blind spots with some of these tools, which that's why I like to have this conversation, because the answer is very rarely we productize our platform in a totally AI capacity. It's like, that's rarely what I'm getting in a response to this question, which is, I think, honest. And that's what I like to make sure people are hearing as well as they talk through it. Jason, zoom out, not in your own seat. How do you want people talking about PI sciences when you're not in the room? What do you want the reputation to be?
Oh my gosh. You know, I love getting phone calls from clients, like patients that we've worked with, where they say, I had no idea what I was doing. I was so confused. I was in pain. I didn't have answers. And then PI Sciences held my hand through that entire treatment plan. They knew the direction I was going and they helped me through that. And we've gotten so many calls from patients about that. If I want people talking about PI Sciences, they can say whatever they want, honestly. I don't care. They're up to they can own their free speech. That's their decision. What would I like them to say? I hope they see how much effort and love we put behind every single case that comes through our system in our portal. It's not just a number. You can look at the numbers behind any kind of business, but really every number is a life. Every has an impact. And the industry that we're working in isn't someone's benefit. It is we are here at the result of someone's misfortune. They've gotten in a car accident. They've been in a traumatic injury. They have brain damage. Some have died, and we're on the medical malpractice side. Like there's so much at stake with every single person coming through our system. I wish it was a lighter subject of, personal injury is amazing, but there's a lot of emotion that comes into this. Like lives have been literally destroyed because of traumatic injury. And how can we help someone make their life as good as it can be, and then make sure they have the funds they need for the rest of their life to cover their medical needs? That's what we want. That is our mission and our goal. And we hope that people feel our love when when they're talking with their onboarding specialists. They have a dedicated medical manager. They've got a dedicated doctor who's looking over their case, their diagnostic codes, their medical documentation to make sure it fits the bill. It's not running crazy. It makes sense. And we hope that patients really feel that. And I've felt that from so many patients. They're like, thank you. I'm so grateful for PI Sciences. So
That
I hope that's what they feel.
that has to be such a rewarding result of building a business. Especially, I can't help but think of uh, expanding on what you just mentioned, which is this is such an intimidating process and experience for people that are already going through a traumatic window of their times, oftentimes.
Yeah.
So take my hand and just guide me through this, like this
Yeah.
tunnel of pain and confusion and discomfort. And if there's a part of the process that can be easier, I can only imagine the wonders it does to people, or the stress that it alleviates as they're going through these things. So
Yeah.
hats off to you, man. Again, thank you so much for joining and saying yes to these conversations. For everyone interested, you can find Jason on LinkedIn, Jason Wardell, Dell, and keep an eye on PI Sciences. Jason, thank you, man.
Thank you. I
You're a legend.
appreciate the time you've had me on the podcast.
You're a legend. Cheers.
Cheers.